Echoes in the data. Aris Thorne didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in remnant magnetism, tectonic shifts, and the cold, indifferent truth etched into layers of ancient rock. His laboratory at the University of Colorado Boulder was a temple to empiricism, humming servers processing terabytes of geophysical data, the air thick with the scent of ozone and cooling coffee. Aris was a geophysicist specializing in paleomagnetism, the study of the Earth's magnetic field as recorded in rocks. At 45, he was academically burned out, cynical, and possessed a mind that latched onto anomalies like a burr. It was this trait that led him to the Delta Archive late one Tuesday night. The Delta Archive was a digital dumping ground for the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, a collection of data digitized but never properly cataloged. These were Cold War-era surveys, conducted in haste by teams searching for uranium deposits or stable sites for underground nuclear testing. Aris was looking for routine mapping data of the Great Basin, a vast, arid region of the American West known for its geological isolation and haunting silence. On his monitor, a map of Nevada unfolded, peppered with gravimetric survey lines from 1958. And then he saw it. It looked like a corrupted pixel in reality. In south-central Nevada, in an area known as the Smoke Creek Desert, the data went haywire. The gravimetric readings showed a localized inversion so sharp it was physically impossible. It was as if a mountain had suddenly become weightless over a half-mile radius. Aris rubbed his eyes, dismissing it as old equipment failure. He ran a correction algorithm. The anomaly remained. He overlaid the magnetometer data from the same year. The result made his blood run cold. At that same point, the Earth's magnetic field didn't just distort. It twisted into a perfect spiral. "This is impossible," he whispered to the empty lab. Such readings might occur over the epicenter of a nuclear blast at the moment of detonation, but not over a desolate plateau of basalt and sagebrush. He checked the metadata. A small note in the corner of the file read, "Project Silent Horizon. Access level, Amber 7. Classified until 2008. 2008 had long since passed, yet the data had remained buried in this digital grave. Driven by a professional curiosity bordering on obsession, Aris began to dig deeper. He scoured regional historical archives, searching for any mention of Silent Horizon. Nothing. But a search of the anomaly's coordinates in digitized 19th-century newspapers yielded a chilling coincidence. An article from the Nevada State Journal, dated October 1888, recounted the Lost Egan expedition. A group of 5 military surveyors and 2 Paiute guides had vanished without a trace while mapping the region. The only thing search parties found months later was a leather-bound journal, half buried in the sand, belonging to Lieutenant Silas Egan. The article quoted excerpts from the journal, which at the time were dismissed as the ravings of a man dying of thirst. October 14th. The compass is useless. The needle spins like a dervish. The air here is thick, vibrating. We hear a sound, not with our ears, but with our bones. It comes from the earth itself. The Paiutes refuse to go further. They call it the place where the sky breathes the earth. They call it the Hearth of Silence. October 16th. We found the canyon that is not on the maps. The rocks here. They sing black, glassy pillars, perfectly smooth. This is not nature. God, they begin to glow when the sun sets. The sound is becoming unbearable. Jenkins tries to shoot at them, but the bullets, they simply stop in midair and fall. Aris leaned back. 1888, 1958. 2 points in time, 70 years apart, pointing to the same spot and describing impossible phenomena. This wasn't just a geological quirk. It was a secret carefully buried under layers of time and bureaucratic silence. Gravimetric inversion and magnetic spirals. These were modern terms for what Lieutenant Egan had called singing rocks and a spinning compass. Aris felt that specific itch at the base of his skull, a mix of fear and exhilaration that comes when standing on the threshold of a massive discovery. He knew he couldn't just close the file. He had to see it. He needed empirical proof. He quickly drafted a field research proposal, disguised as a routine calibration check for satellite data in remote basins. The funding was minimal, but he only needed a jeep, his gear, and a week of time. As he packed his bags, he noticed a glitch in the server logs. Someone else had viewed the Silent Horizon file just 2 hours before him. The IP address led nowhere, a complex chain of proxies ending somewhere in Northern Virginia, not far from Langley. Anxiety settled like a cold stone in his stomach. He wasn't a paranoid man, but he knew the history of science. The greatest discoveries often cast the darkest shadows. Hearth of Silence. The Great Basin Desert is not just an absence of water. It is a presence of emptiness. After a 6-hour drive from Reno in a rented SUV packed with seismographs, magnetometers, and spectrometers, Aris found himself in a world of dust, sagebrush, and a sky so vast it felt heavy. His GPS began to fail 50 miles out. The cursor on the screen jumped erratically, showing him moving at the speed of sound one moment and standing still the next. He had to navigate using old topographical maps and visual landmarks, razor-sharp volcanic ridges cutting the horizon. As he neared the coordinates of the 1958 anomaly, the environment grew increasingly alien. The familiar scent of sage was replaced by a metallic tang in the back of his throat, like chewing on aluminum foil. The air felt electrified. The hair on his arms stood up even though there wasn't a storm cloud in sight. He set up base camp 10 miles from the suspected epicenter at the foot of a weathered mountain range. His first task was to deploy a passive seismic array to listen to the Earth. As the sun began to dip, painting the desert in surreal shades of violet and orange, Aris turned on his audio monitors. He expected the usual background noise, wind, distant micro-earthquakes. Instead, he heard the hum. It wasn't a sound in the traditional sense. It was an infrasonic vibration at the edge of perception, a frequency around 19 hertz. It resonated in his chest cavity, triggering an irrational sense of dread and a slight nausea. It was the sound heard with bones that Egan had described. He barely slept that night. The hum invaded his dreams, turning them into anxious visions of crumbling cities and black monoliths rising from the ground. At dawn, he set out on foot toward the epicenter, carrying a portable proton magnetometer and a gravimeter. The landscape became increasingly distorted. Rock formations were unnaturally smooth, as if polished by a giant sandblaster. He found shards of obsidian scattered in strange, almost mathematical patterns. About a mile from his goal, he hit an obstacle. A rusted barbed wire fence stretched across a dry creek bed. A faded sign hung from a tilting post. Warning: U.S. Government Environmental Quarantine Zone. No trespassing. Violators subject to arrest under Directive 77B. Aris photographed the sign. Directive 77B. He had never heard of it. This didn't look like a standard military enclosure. It looked like a hasty attempt to ward off the curious. He climbed over. His scientific curiosity now outweighed his caution. His instruments began to scream. The magnetometer showed readings that should have torn his gear apart, and the gravimeter registered fluctuations as if the ground beneath him were breathing. After hiking another mile through a narrow gorge, he emerged into a hidden valley. It was the canyon that wasn't on the maps. Egan hadn't lied. In the center of the valley, surrounded by towering walls of red sandstone, stood a structure. It was not natural. 12 massive pillars of a black, glassy material, resembling obsidian, but far more durable, were arranged in a perfect circle roughly 100 meters in diameter. Each pillar was at least 10 meters tall, perfectly smooth, without a single seam or joint. Aris approached, feeling the infrasonic hum intensify, until it became a physical pressure on his eardrums. "My God," he exhaled. "This couldn't have been built by the ancient Paiutes, nor could it have been built by military engineers in the 1950s. The stonework was beyond anything known to modern science. It was not from here, or not from this time." He touched one of the pillars. The surface was ice-cold despite the scorching sun. Upon contact, a strange sensation shot through his hand. Not pain, but a vibration that instantly spread through his entire nervous system. At that moment, he noticed something at the base of the central pillar. A tattered leather satchel with brass buckles, U.S. Army gear from the late 19th century. Next to it lay a skeleton, half buried in the silt, and beside it, a rusted Colt revolver. The remnants of the Egan expedition. They had found this place and died here, driven mad by the sound. Aris began setting up his equipment in the center of the circle. He needed the data. He had to understand what this machine was, because it was a machine, a geophysical resonator of incredible power. As he fumbled with his spectrometer, he heard a sound that didn't belong to the desert. The sound of an engine. A heavy, high-powered engine. He scrambled up a nearby rock outcropping and looked through his binoculars. Far off in the desert, kicking up a massive plume of dust, 2 black SUVs with no markings were racing toward his camp. They moved with purpose, knowing exactly where they were going. The people who had viewed the file before him. They had come for him, or for what he had found. Resonance. Aris realized he had almost no time. The black SUVs would find his empty camp and follow his tracks to the canyon. Fear paralyzed him for a second, but scientific discipline took over. He had to get the data, or all of this was for nothing. He returned to the circle of black pillars. The sun was now low on the horizon, and just as Egan had described, the monoliths began to change. Their black, light-absorbing surfaces started to pulse with a deep, internal violet glow. The hum intensified. It was no longer just a sound. It was a force. The ground beneath his feet vibrated. The sand around the pillars began to rise into the air, forming complex geometric patterns driven by invisible acoustic waves, cymatics on a giant scale. Aris's instruments recorded the impossible. The gravity field inside the circle was fluctuating. For a moment, he felt lighter, as if Earth's pull had weakened by 10%. The magnetic field was twisting into a vortex centered directly above the circle. "It's a geoengineering structure," he dictated into his recorder, shouting over the roar. "It manipulates the fundamental forces of the planet. It's not a weapon. It's a stabilizer, or maybe an ignition key." Suddenly, the vibration hit a crescendo. Aris fell to his knees, clutching his ears. The world around him began to blur. His vision desynchronized. He saw flashes, not hallucinations, but overlays of a different reality. For a split second, he saw the canyon not as dry and dead, but lush, covered in prehistoric vegetation. He saw a sky where unfamiliar constellations burned. He saw figures, tall, humanoid, but not quite human, standing around the pillars in ceremonial robes. The vision snapped away as quickly as it had appeared, leaving him gasping on the sand. At that moment, men emerged from the gorge. There were 6 of them, dressed in tan tactical gear with no insignia, their faces covered. They carried assault rifles, but they didn't fire immediately. The leader, a tall man with cold eyes visible through his mask, raised a hand, signaling his team to stop. They clearly knew what this place was and feared its power. "Dr. Thorne!" The leader's voice was amplified by a speaker. "Step away from the equipment. You have entered an Omega-level containment zone." "What is this?" Eris shouted back, his voice cracking from the tension and the infrasound. "Who are you?" "We are the ones who ensure the silent horizon stays silent," the man replied. "Your data belongs to us. This is not for public knowledge. Humanity is not ready for what lies here. This isn't your discovery. This is a legacy of someone else. It's older than humanity." The pillars began to glow brighter. The violet light became blinding. The hum shifted into a high-pitched shriek, moving beyond the range of hearing, but causing physical pain. "Get back!" the mercenary leader screamed to his men as the sand around them began to boil. "It's activating!" The gravitational anomaly spiked. One of the mercenaries, who had stepped too close to the circle, was suddenly hoisted into the air by an unseen force and hurled 10 meters back, slamming into the rock wall. The others opened fire, not at Eris, but at the pillars in a panicked attempt to stop the process. The bullets, just as in 1888, slowed as they entered the circle's perimeter, their kinetic energy absorbed by the field, before clinking harmlessly to the sand. "Idiots! You can't shoot physics!" Eris yelled. He realized the installation was reacting to external aggression, or perhaps to the presence of so many people. The resonance was reaching a critical point. The canyon walls began to crack, raining stones down upon them. It was chaos. The mercenaries were retreating, dragging their wounded comrade, their discipline shattered by the incomprehensible power. Eris, in the epicenter, was paradoxically in the eye of the storm. He grabbed the hard drive containing the recorded data and his field journal. He had to get out. If he died here, the knowledge died with him. Using the confusion and the seismic chaos, Eris bolted toward a narrow crevice in the far wall of the canyon, the only path not blocked by the masked men. Behind him, the violet light flashed with the intensity of a supernova. A shockwave, not of air, but of gravity, knocked him off his feet, tossing him into the darkness of the crevice. The last thing he heard before losing consciousness was an inhuman polyphonic choir emanating from the singing rocks, a sound that pierced the very fabric of reality. The silence after the storm. Ariz woke up in a hospital in Reno 3 days later. The official story: he had been caught in a rock slide during a solo hiking trip and was found by rescuers dehydrated and suffering from a severe concussion. His equipment was gone. His Jeep had been found burned out, allegedly due to a fuel leak. The SUVs, the mercenaries, the battle in the canyon, none of it existed in the police reports. But he still had the hard drive. He had tucked it into the lining of his jacket before passing out, and the rescuers, or whoever was pretending to be them, had missed it during their initial search. Back in Boulder, Eris found his lab had been scrubbed. Every trace of his research on Silent Horizon had been wiped from the university servers. The file at the USGS was gone, as if it had never existed. He was given a stern warning that further inquiries could cost him his career, his freedom, or his life. He became a ghost. He moved to a cheap apartment, used only cash, and communicated through encrypted channels. At night, he sat before his air-gapped laptop, analyzing the scraps of data he had managed to save. What he saw both terrified and fascinated him. The spectral analysis of the pillar material didn't match any known terrestrial mineral. Its isotopic signature suggested an extrasolar origin, forged under conditions of extreme pressure and temperature unattainable by modern science. But the most important discovery was the resonance pattern. Aris ran the acoustic data through complex decryption algorithms. It wasn't just noise, it was a language, or a map. The vibrations created a complex 3D model of the Earth, with specific nodal points highlighted. The canyon in Nevada was only one of them. Aris overlaid this model onto a globe. Other points aligned with famous megalithic structures or unexplained natural anomalies. The Giza Plateau in Egypt, the Tunguska region in Siberia, the Richat structure in Mauritania, and the floor of the Bermuda Triangle. Silent Horizon wasn't just an isolated Cold War project. It was the U.S. government's code name for the study of one node in a vast, ancient, global network. A network that perhaps stabilized the planet's tectonics, or, more frighteningly, served as a beacon. Those men in the desert, they weren't just hiding the truth. They were guarding a sleeping giant. And by his interference, Aris might have nudged it awake. He looked at the blinking cursor on his screen. The data was incomplete. He needed more. He knew he was being watched, knew they would come for him if he continued. But he couldn't stop now. He was no longer just a scientist. He was the keeper of a secret that could rewrite human history. Or end it. Aris opened a new map. His fingers slid across the screen, over the Atlantic, stopping at a point deep within the Siberian taiga. There, where the sky had split open in 1908, and the forest had been flattened for hundreds of miles, there was also silence. And there, something else was waiting. He began to pack his bag. This time, he would be ready. The expedition was only just beginning.